All right, guys, we're going to start the today's show here. So the I Love Seville studio is in downtown Charlottesville, and we've had quite a few people watching the show this week that are not in Charlottesville or Albemarle County or in Central Virginia. And that's certainly the case because of we'll cut to the chase, the national spotlight that's on the Charlottesville community now again because of this mass murder at the university Sunday evening. And as I was clearing my head in between shows and walking to get some fresh air and actually walking to the studio this morning, you cannot help but notice, I could not help but notice, somewhere between 3 and 4 dozen, somewhere between 36 and 48 national news vehicles in downtown Charlottesville. And that's likely even a light estimate there. The national news has descended upon us again. Christopher Darnell Jones had his initial court appearance this morning, about an hour ago. Albemarle General District Court Judge Andrew Sneatherin that was there. Friend of the program, Commonwealth's Attorney Jim Hingley, of course, there. And details continue to emerge. We'll highlight some of those details, including fresh details from questions I asked yesterday in a Washington Post article that was released last night. The details that are emerging continue to be, I'd say, horrifying. How do you characterize them, Judah?
Yeah, they're pretty terrible. There's really no escaping whatever it was that caused this guy to take out his angers and frustrations on fellow classmates.
We'll talk about him today on the show. The details from the Washington Post article. We'll talk about new details that have emerged today after the initial court appearance, and we'll ask more questions that need to be asked, questions that are difficult, but questions that need to be asked. Give the show, interact with the show, ask questions with the show. We'll try to relay as many viewer and listener comments and questions on the program as well. It's the Wednesday edition of the I Love Seville show, and if I'm in downtown Charlottesville, our studio's in downtown Charlottesville, and at least 4 dozen, at least 48 individual news vehicles, national news vehicles all over the downtown area right now covering this story. Judah Woodcower is our director. My name is Jerry Miller. Judah, we can rock and roll when you're ready.
Quiet on the set.
Good Wednesday morning, guys. Wednesday afternoon, excuse me. Thank you kindly for joining us. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you for joining us here on the I Love Seville show. Today's show is live from downtown Charlottesville. And downtown Charlottesville on this crisp Wednesday autumn afternoon is, again, unfortunately, the epicenter for national media. This morning, about an hour ago, the national news was covering Christopher Darnell Jones Jr.'s initial court appearance. And the Albemarle County courthouse is literally 1 block away from where I am broadcasting right now. As I was walking this morning to the studio, I could not help but notice 4 dozen, roughly, national news media vehicles with their vehicles branded with the respective outlets they work for. Tents are being set up, national media parking illegally all around the courthouse, faces that you recognize from the evening news, the morning news, standing all over the Albemarle County Courthouse, adjacent, in front, on the side, some sitting in benches, production assistants and producers and directors and camera people, finding every nook and cranny, every curb, every sidewalk to post up with temporary offices here in Charlottesville, Virginia. Unfortunately, our community is in the national news cycle yet again. Today, Christopher Darnell Jones Jr., a University of Virginia student, had his initial court appearance. And today we learned new details about a mass shooting Sunday evening that has rocked our community with the same momentum, with the same unfortunate notoriety, with the same disturbance, fervor, sorrow, dismay, anger, disgust, fear, unknown. So many feelings we're feeling right now. It's very reminiscent and synonymous to the feelings that we all experienced post-August 12, 2017. Many of these feelings, and I was literally on Market Street on August 12, 2017, watching horror that I'd never seen before. The feelings I'm experiencing now, and I would imagine you, the viewer and listener, have similar feelings, are the same that I processed, managed post A12. I'd like to highlight on today's show new details that have emerged today. Details including the cancellation of the Coastal Carolina game set for Saturday. Details from a Washington Post article that answered one of my questions from yesterday. That question, why was the killer, the alleged killer, on this chartered bus if he wasn't enrolled in the class? Well, now we know. A really disturbing detail emerged from today's initial court appearance, which friend of the program, Albemarle County Commonwealth's Attorney Jim Hingley, relayed to the media. Chris Darnell Jones Jr., the alleged killer, shot and killed Devin Chandler while he was sleeping on the bus. He was sleeping on the bus. I'm going to ask questions that need answers, and I will outline them now to start the show. Here's a question. Why was Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. allowed to stay as an enrolled student at the University of Virginia, despite not one conviction, which we talked about yesterday, a gun charge, concealed weapon, Chesterfield County, convicted in 2021, 12-month suspended sentence, but a number of other charges against Jones, which I will highlight today? Why was he allowed to stay in the school? Here's a very difficult question. And this is coming from someone who attended the University of Virginia and someone who bleeds orange and blue. And this is a difficult question for me to ask, but it's a question that needs to be asked. Did University of Virginia red tape and bureaucratic protocols prevent swifter disciplinary action from happening? Did bureaucratic red tape and bureaucratic protocols keep authorities from removing the alleged murderer from school grounds in much swifter response time? Here's another question that needs to be asked, and it's another difficult one. If the alleged killer had a gun on his person last year, convicted for this concealed weapons charge in Chesterfield, and then he talked about having a gun on his person in September of this year, which now we have more information. A student reported this conversation to authorities. Initially, Jim Ryan and Tim Longo in their press conference on Monday said a third party reported to the university that the alleged murderer was talking about having a gun on his person in September. Jim Ryan and Tim Longo in that press conference, and I went and rewatched it, said that third party who reported this conversation to UVA was not affiliated with the university. Today we know that third party was in fact affiliated with the university and was in fact a student. You got a lot of red flags there, as I highlighted yesterday. I'm going to ask the question, what kind of true protocols or disciplinary actions were actually in play to prevent a convicted, I'll choose my words very carefully here. What kind of true protocols were truly in play to prevent this mass murder from happening? Here's another difficult question that needs to be asked. Will there be a change of venue motion? How can, if this case proceeds in Albemarle County, and the University of Virginia is Albemarle County technically, so it's an Albemarle County courthouse. If this case proceeds in Albemarle County, with Jim Hingley as the Commonwealth's Attorney of Albemarle County, how can there truly be a neutral jury selected from Albemarle County and this area? How can the jury truly be neutral? Will there be a change of venue motion? Different courthouse, different zip code, different location. Will anyone fight a change of venue motion? And if a prosecutor fights a change of venue motion, is that leverage for a potential appeal because the jury pool was tainted by its perspective coming onto the jury? Tough questions. Jim Hingley is a friend of the show. He is a big picture guy. A big picture guy. I would expect, and I am far, as you know, just ask questions and utilize common sense. I have no legal background whatsoever here. It would seem to me that the jury selected in Albemarle County or from this area would undoubtedly be tainted with its perspective prior to prior to this case becoming a reality in a courtroom. I think the last thing anyone wants that's watching this program is for any I's not to be dotted, any T's not to be crossed, and any loopholes left available to be exploited. I got other questions I'm going to ask for you and try to answer, at least just ask them because they need to be asked. Does anyone ask or wonder how this is not first-degree murder or how this is not premeditated? You got an alleged killer who got on a bus with a gun, went on the bus with the gun from Charlottesville to Washington, D.C., couple hours away, got off the bus with the gun, watched a play, then went to an Ethiopian restaurant for dinner, then got back on the bus after watching the play, after eating at the Ethiopian restaurant, after spending a couple hours on the bus driving to D.C., got back on the bus, rode on the bus to Charlottesville from D.C., and then murdered 3 people and shot 2 others. That, to me, is the definition of thinking about what you're doing. Throw in the fact that one of the players who was murdered, Devin Chandler, was sleeping at the time. Are you asking this question? How is this not first-degree murder? How is this not premeditated? Are you asking that? Is anyone? I certainly am. All right, let's get to some things we know. A number of people shared with me this morning a fantastic article. Scott Aaronworth, if you are watching, I first received the article from Scott, an attorney from Virginia Beach. And Scott is an A++ guy. A Wahoo for life, a criminal attorney, and a man who utilizes common sense, the spoken word, and the law for his living. And he sent me an article from the Washington Post this morning, and this article from the Washington Post answered some questions for me. One of the primary questions, the Washington Post article, which was published after yesterday's show, it was published in the evening on the Washington Post website last night in the 8 o'clock range. The alleged murderer was not in the class, was not enrolled in the class. And I asked the question yesterday, how is a student who's not enrolled in this class allowed to be on the field trip, to go out of the state on a field trip when he's not in the class? Well, now we have an answer from the Washington Post. And this is so tough, dude. The alleged murderer was invited on the school field trip by the professor. Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. was not enrolled in the class focused on African American playwrights. However, he was invited to the field trip by the professor because he was taking a social justice class with the professor in a completely different course. The field trip watched a Mosaic Theater Company play about Emmett Till, whose young life was cut short by racial violence. The play, Emmett Till, was about an individual whose life was cut short by violence. I cannot imagine how the professor feels right now. Teresa Davis, the professor, I am by no means holding her accountable, throwing shade to Professor Davis. There's no way she could know that this would happen. But one of the questions I had yesterday, how can a student who's not in the class be a part of a field trip, now has an answer. The professor invited the alleged killer on the field trip because the alleged killer was a member of another one of her classes. New details emerged today. Devin Chandler, the transfer from Wisconsin, was shot while he was sleeping on the bus. Murder is I don't think they're, from a humanity standpoint, different levels or shades or variants of murder. But from a legal standpoint, there certainly is. And shooting someone while they are sleeping is certainly very different than shooting someone while they are attacking you, bullying you, making fun of you, hurting you. Devin Chandler was sleeping on the bus. We learned that today. Jim Hinchley confirmed that with media outside the courtroom of Albemarle County, which is literally 1 block from where I'm talking right now. We also have more information on Mike Hollins, the running back. 3 football players were murdered. Lavelle Davis Jr., Deshaun Perry, and Devin Chandler. 1 football player was shot and is in critical condition, although his parents have indicated because of his fighter's spirit and because of his good fitness and physicality that he is heading to the direction of surviving. That individual is Mike Hollins, a running back from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was shot in the back. Mike Hollins' mother did an interview, TV, with media in the last 24 hours. And in that interview, she highlighted some fresh aspects to this story. And according to Mike Hollins' mother, Mike was shot in the back because he went off the bus when the shooting first transpired. And then according to Mike Hollins' mother, he, in heroic fashion, tried to get back on the bus, returned back on the bus to help his fallen teammates, and that's when he got shot in the back. He was, in some ways, a fallen Good Samaritan who now is fighting for his life in a University of Virginia hospital. We learn more of the criminal background of Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. had a concealed weapons conviction in Chesterfield, Virginia last year. He was fined $100 and given a 12-month suspended sentence. A judge also issued a 3-year good behavior bond in that case, according to court records. The judge also ordered Jones to forfeit the firearm. At the time of that arrest last year, Jones also had outstanding warrants on misdemeanor hit-and-run property damage and reckless driving charges in Petersburg. He was convicted in October of last year on the outstanding warrants on misdemeanor hit-and-run property damage and reckless driving. The judge also issued a 12-month suspended sentence on each of those charges. In September of this year, a couple of months ago, he, in conversation with another individual who now it has been confirmed is a student at the University of Virginia. On Monday in the press conference, this individual was identified in the press conference as someone not affiliated with UVA. Now we know that's not the case, and now we know that person was in fact a student at UVA. Darnell Jones Jr., the alleged killer, in conversation with a student, talked about having a gun. The student who heard Jones Jr. make that comment reported it to the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia, upon hearing this from the student, started digging into Jones Jr., the student. That's when the University of Virginia, for the first time, learned of the conviction from last year, the gun conviction. In the last 2 months and change, the University of Virginia has learned that one of its students in a gun-free zone, and remember, the University of Virginia is billed, it's branded, it's monikered, it's marketed, it's promoted, it's described, it's written about. It proudly champions itself as a gun-free zone. Yet 2 months ago, the University of Virginia learned that one of its students not only was talking about having a gun with another student, but also had a gun conviction from a year ago. Furthermore, that student was involved in what we know now very little of, a hazing incident, very ambiguous, a hazing incident. Did this hazing incident happen in a fraternity? There's a lot of talk that Jones Jr. was a fraternity member. Did this hazing incident happen in a classroom, in an apartment? Did this hazing incident happen on grounds, off grounds, in a locker room? Did it involve football players? Did it involve ex-teammates, classmates? This hazing, bullying is very ambiguous right now. The alleged murderer's father said to the media that his son was very paranoid, that he was being bullied. Very paranoid. Didn't want to talk to the fullest extent with his father what happened. But the father indicated with the media he was in fact being bullied and was, the father's words, paranoid. So I ask you, the viewer and listener, this question. And I ask you, the viewer and listener, this question. And I ask you before you answer this question, I ask you to answer this question in a couple of different ways. I want you to answer the question as if you were a parent, and many of the viewers and listeners of this show are parents. I want you to try to then answer this question as an independent, almost as if you were an authority figure at the University of Virginia. And then I want you to answer this question as if you were answering the question from strictly a common sense perspective. Here's the question. If you were a parent and you knew someone at a school had a gun conviction and then later was talking about having a gun and utilizing it, and that same student was involved in some kind of hazing situation, which common sense would suggest he was the one being hazed or bullied. If you were a parent, what would go through your mind? What would you be thinking? Would you be fearful of that student? Would you insist that something happen immediately with that student? Now answer this question from a common sense perspective, okay? Just common sense. You got a man who's convicted of a gun charge last year. You're using common sense here. That same man, last year's gun conviction, this year is talking about using the gun. That same man is bullied and hazed. What is your common sense meter or your common sense radar or odometer? What is it doing? Because my common sense meter, radar, and odometer is going from flat line all the way to the other side. And as a proud Wahoo, a lifelong Wahoo, my dad went to UVA, my brother went to UVA, I went to UVA, would love if our son went to UVA, would love if our son, who is a few days away from being born, went to UVA. Their choice, no pressure. My common sense odometer suggests that something should happen immediately. And I understand public universities have red tape and bureaucratic protocols. I get that. But does that red tape and those bureaucratic protocols, is 2 months of red tape and 2 months of bureaucratic protocols, that seems from a common sense standpoint to be entirely too long, doesn't it? Before any kind of swift response was implemented or integrated or actualized. 2+ months, there's a guy on grounds who in a number of different circumstances was reported or convicted of a weapon on his person. It seems, and this is really hard for me to say. It seems careless. It seems irresponsible. It seems negligent. It seems careless at best. Irresponsible in the middle area. And negligent red tape and bureaucratic protocols could have been massaged, eradicated, set aside, are navigated in much more expeditious fashion. I mean, we're talking about a gun here. We're not talking about lying, cheating, or stealing, which the honor code is predicated upon. This is not lying. This is not cheating on a test. And this is not stealing something. This is a damn gun. And it's a gun on the person of someone who's bullied and hazed. My hope, I have a lot of hopes here. And one of them is certainly that the University of Virginia, when it comes to guns on grounds, acts in much swifter capacities. And what I'm about to say is going to be really difficult, it's really difficult for me to say because I love this damn school so much, man. I love this school and I bleed orange and blue. But if you're the parents of the 3 men who have perished, and you're the parents of the 2 individuals, one a man and one a woman, who were shot, you undoubtedly have to ask yourself here, did you, UVA, let my kid, my child, my most precious being in my life down from a protection and safety standpoint? Did you do wrong by my son or daughter in protecting their well-being while we paid for them? Sure, maybe some of them are on scholarship. But while we allowed our sons and our daughter to go to your school, when your offspring, when your kids go to college, you're entrusting the university first and foremost with their safety. Undoubtedly, learning and education are a key component of university and college experiences. But first and foremost, it's safety. The school has to maintain the safety of its students. And it seems to me, and this is difficult to say, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And we have very real conversations on this show. If you watch the I Love CVille show, you know we do not beat around the bush. It seems to me that the University of Virginia, when in September it found out that a student was talking about having a gun on his person, a student who last year was convicted, not charged, not arrested, convicted of a gun on his person just outside Charlottesville. It seems to me 2 months is an entirely too long period of time for swift disciplinary action. And I asked the question, how was this man, the alleged murderer, allowed to remain on grounds at UVA after September's conversation? It's a fair question. It's a tough question. And it's a question that undoubtedly elicits emotion. But how was this student allowed to remain on grounds? And it seems to me the safety issue is one that the University of Virginia is going to have to face from a legal standpoint moving forward with the 5 families, 3 of them who lost their sons, and 2 of them who have dealt with their most precious lives being shot. That's a conversation that's going to be had. With men and women in suits and potentially in courtrooms for months to come. Today we also learned that the Coastal Carolina game scheduled for this Saturday at Scott Stadium has been canceled. I said on yesterday's show that the game should be canceled. This morning it was. This morning, the athletics department also indicated that it has not made a decision yet on the Virginia Tech game in Blacksburg, scheduled for a week from this Saturday. My hope is the University of Virginia Athletic Department also cancels the Virginia Tech football game scheduled for a week and change from now at Lane Stadium. I understand the players want to play and they want to fight and they want to honor their fallen teammates. I understand the concept of loyalty and honor and playing for the name and the lives of those that have fallen or injured. But sometimes we don't think clearly when we're grieving. And sometimes we don't think clearly at times of despair and times of anguish and times of hurt and death. And while it's not an exact comparison, a comparison can be made nevertheless with a player who is injured. It is not up to that athlete to return to the game. It is up to doctors and coaches and medical professionals to assess the mental and physical state of that player before allowing said player to return to action. And if you're an adult, if you're a coach, if you're a medical professional, if you're an athletic director, and if you're someone who's entrusted with the safety and responsibility of student athletes, and that's what we're dealing with, unpaid players. And if you're entrusted with these athletes and their safety, do you think allowing these athletes to play in a football game against their arch rival right around the funeral time of watching 3 of their teammates get buried is a good idea? What can be gained by playing this contest? What can be gained? It's not going to lead to healing or closure. What can be gained? Weigh the pros and cons. But you know what? The cons and why they far outweigh the pros? Let me tell you the cons. You want to hear the cons? Not mentally prepared to play leads to even more potential chances of injury. How's that for a con? Not mentally being prepared to play leads for poor performance. What if they lose? How does that going to impact mentalities and mindsets and mental health? The cons far outweigh the pros when it comes to this Virginia Tech game. Cancel the game and allow the students to focus on grieving, as opposed to saying, student athletes, guess what? On top of grieving, you're going to play your arch nemesis on national television and the whole world is going to watch you. No pressure. Come on. Come on. I'll get to your comments here shortly, viewers and listeners. Put your comments in the feed. We're live on every social media platform known to man. Put them in the feed. Our software will aggregate your comments and I will relay them live on air. I'm going to close with one other topic here. This is a topic that I was conversating with Scott Aaronworth via text. Scott, I appreciate you. Very much so. And this is a topic that I had not personally have thought of. But Scott, who's a criminal attorney, put it on my radar. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for all the viewers and listeners who often make me think. Like, a lot of the topics we cover on these shows, guys, are topics that are crowdsourced by you guys that I don't necessarily think about. I'm one person. Me and Judah are two people here. And doing a show like this that's long-form content, literally an hour plus a day, is hard. It's difficult. Talking for an hour straight without stopping is hard. That's why you often hear me on this show with strained vocal cords. And this isn't just like the type of talking we do amongst each other. This is literally aggressive talking. That's why they're often strained. He brings this point up to me. He said, expect a change of venue motion to be upcoming potentially. He says they are not granted very often. He said, I would have thought it would have happened with the James Fields case, but it was not. He says in this case, and I asked for his permission to relay this exchange before I relaying it to you. And he granted that permission. I never speak out of turn without asking who I'm interacting with first whether I can relay what we're talking about to you, the viewer and listener. And if someone says no, I honor it. That's why I get so much of this information, because I'm a man of my word. If you say I want anonymity or I don't want this on air, I don't do it. He's given me permission to bring this topic up, the change of venue topic. He said they're not granted very often a change of venue. But he says in this case, how can they get a fair and impartial jury? He believes it should be granted. He says a smart prosecutor would not object to a change of venue because it could become an issue with an appeal. He says the Commonwealth's attorney needs to be looking at the big picture. And then I said, may I reference these texts in the show? And he says, absolutely, sure, no problem. Criminal defense attorney from Virginia Beach who bleeds orange and blue. Scott, your father went to UVA. You grew up going to these games. He made great points, something I hadn't even considered when prepping for this show. How do you get a jury to listen to this case in Albemarle County? Anybody you pull from this area has already got a mindset made up about this alleged killer. How do you get an impartial jury in this town? Would I love for it to happen here? Love is the wrong word. Would I like for it to happen here? Yes, because that's where the murder happened. But he makes great points. How do you find an impartial jury when it's such a talked about and it's football players at UVA. 60-some thousand of us go to these games. Change of venue. Doing shows like this takes so much out of you, like physically and like emotionally. Like so much out of you. All right, let me get to some comments here. Put your comments in the feed and I will relay them live on air. Okay, we have software that aggregates all the comments from Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and Apple Podcasts and all these other places. This is from Carol Thorpe. She's the queen of Jack Jewett. She also sent me the Washington Post article, and Carol Thorpe is routinely someone who gets me thinking and contributes to this show. Carol Thorpe says, this is simply my choice, but for my purposes going forward, I am dropping the term hazing as it pertains to this case until I hear some evidence that it happened. The word conjures a specific situation when athletes are involved. Perhaps use of the word bullying is sufficiently accurate until we know more. The only person I've heard an authority, I believe the source of it, say the word was Chief Longo, who also said twice that no affiliated UVA persons were involved at certain points. Let's get some clarity on hazing moving forward. She also says, I wondered about the security at the theater. Jones would have had to carry his gun into the show with him unless he left it on the bus, which I doubt. It's a great question. Did the alleged killer bring the gun with him into the theater in D.C.? Did the theater in D.C. have metal detectors that detected weapons upon entry? Or did the theater in D.C. not have metal detectors? Did Jones leave his gun on the bus when going into the Ethiopian restaurant in the theater? Or was it on his person at the theater and in the Ethiopian restaurant? And I'll take it a step further. If Jones is of clarity of mind to say, I'm about to go into a theater, let me leave the gun on the bus instead of bringing it with me, doesn't that further justify premeditation? I mean, the dude is legitimately thinking about what he's doing. 2 hours up, 2 hours down, time in a theater, and time at an Ethiopian restaurant. Kevin Higgins, who's another key contributor to this talk show, he's the king of Greenwood. He routinely contributes to the show. He also shared the Washington Post article with me this morning. He says, so spectators get wanded, the metal detector wand. Spectators get wanded or pass through a metal detector to watch these world-class athletes play, but someone can get on a bus with a gun around the same athletes? I mean, it's a good comment. It's in particular a good comment considering Jones got on the bus with a gun conviction. And Jones wasn't even part of the class. Can you feel how the professor that invited him on this bus, and she has no way of knowing what would have happened. But I can assure you she feels pretty awful right now. Kelly Jackson, the queen of, I'm trying not to blow up your spot here. The queen of Fifth Street, extended. I'll come up with a better one. Kelly Jackson, just great people. She says it would be hard to find anyone in Charlottesville without a connection to the university in some way. 100% agree. I think that comment is in relation to the change of venue motion. Scott put that on my radar. I think she's agreeing with that comment that a change of venue is probably going to happen. How can you find a jury member? How can you find a jury in totality that doesn't know about this situation and is not tainted by it? Shane Baker Serbati says this: tragic combination of multiple factors. Student alleged hazing, student potentially had a gun, a negligent university, lack of momentum investigating the alleged hazing, lack of interviewing action on report of student having a gun, the other variables. Did Jones's father know he had a gun? He had a prior firearm violation. He used paranoid as a description. Was the student having a psychotic event? A lot of unanswered questions. I agree. I have many of those questions. Thank you for commenting. More comments coming in. Let me get to the comments here. Lisa Costello. We love when you watch the show, Lisa. She says, does the University of Virginia have any policies in place which direct a student to be expelled for a gun conviction prior to enrollment or while enrolled at UVA? What, if any, is the policy? As a state institution, they have to follow policy. It's a good comment. The policy, as far as I know it, and what I'm saying is fact, okay? This is what I know of the policy. A student, when convicted of a crime, has to notify the University of Virginia of said conviction. And the alleged killer did not notify the university of the conviction. That's the extent of what I know of the policy. The student, any student, has to notify the university when convicted of a crime, and the student, the alleged killer, did not. Lisa Costello also says, someone saying he said he had a gun with no gun seen is hearsay. If the university starts expelling students based solely on hearsay without proof or a conviction, they are opening themselves up to a civil litigation. That's a fair comment. That is a very fair comment. I will add to that comment, however, when the student is commenting about having a gun on his person, a student who already has a conviction for gun, concealed weapon on his record, then that comment undoubtedly of saying he then has a gun is something that should be considered. If Jones, the alleged killer, if the extent of what had happened to him was this September thing, this conversation a couple months ago, when he said, "Oh, I have a gun," the university should not get involved with that. That's a conversation. They should look into it. They should put him on their radar. But disciplinary expulsion, suspension for having that comment, I agree with you, Lisa, that should not happen. But when you compound the matter with the fact that this dude, this alleged killer, already has a conviction on his record, then the conversation from this past September becomes more, good God, let's figure this out immediately. It should light a fire under your butt. More comments coming in. Lisa, that's a good question. She said, I've read reports that Chris Jones' father stated in an interview that he was being picked on or bullied. Any evidence of this, thoughts of motive? I have similar thoughts that could be motive. Similar thoughts that the bullying could be motive. Similar thoughts. The witnesses of the bullying or hazing, however, refused to cooperate with authority. I would imagine that falls under the air quotes, snitches get stitches, end quote, mentality. Nora Gaffney, the Washington Post article said that Jones did not know these football players. They never played together and they were not in class together. We now know. I respectfully disagree with that, Nora Gaffney. I respectfully disagree with that. Jones knew these players. He may not have played on the team with them. I am in agreement with you there. But Jones knew these players. He knew these players. And perhaps they were not in class together, but they certainly were on the same field trip together. Bill McChesney says the people that are in the athletic department and the players should make the decision on whether we play or not. I respectfully disagree. I don't think the players should have any say in whether or not they play this ball game or not. The players are not in the right frame of mind to determine whether they play Virginia Tech. They are grieving, there's despair, there's sadness, there's sorrow, feelings that some have never experienced in their life. I do not believe they're in their right frame of mind to play a ball game against their arch rival on national TV with the entire world watching them. I think that is a recipe for undoubted disaster. It's just my opinion, though. Lori Fincham, that's a great question. All the folks that were on the bus will have to relive this event for the rest of their lives. Are there any reports of how many other people were on the bus? It's a fantastic question. And you're 100% right. They're going to have to relive this for the rest of their lives. Fantastic question. We do know that it was an African American playwrights class. And I wouldn't imagine that as a large class nor a lecture class, because they're on a charter bus in an intimate setting to the point where the professor was able to invite people outside of the class on the bus. Still, I would think class size would be in the neighborhood of somewhere between 10 and 30 people. And those folks that are on the bus that escaped a gunshot or murder or death still will have to relive this for the rest of their lives. And there is such a thing as, I don't know the exact description of this, but guilt associated with escaping tragedy of this magnitude. And there's undoubted mental navigation that will have to happen with that guilt associated with escaping a tragedy of this magnitude. Chad Wood says, I don't see any gain by playing again this year. Just my opinion. I agree. Kelly Jackson, survivor remorse. That's exactly what it is. Thank you, Shane Baker Serbati. That's exactly what it is. Survivor remorse. That is undoubtedly a thing. Kelly Jackson makes a very good point. Why would anyone tell the school if they had a criminal background? That should change. It is very, very easy to run background checks on all students. There are programs and companies that can do it on 50,000 plus people in less than a week. 100% agree. That is a point I made. I hope one of the protocols that the University of Virginia has moving forward now is it runs conviction checks on its student body, undergrad, graduate, and employees at the start of each semester, bare minimum. Bare minimum. A conviction check should be happening at the start of each semester, bare minimum, for undergraduates, graduates, and employees. It's a public university, for God's sake. Oh, man. All right. That's the show. It's a Wednesday edition of the I Love CVille show. "48 news vehicles from national media, 1 block away. Charlottesville in the national news cycle again. 3 men removed from this world in their peak, prime, and pinnacle. Another fighting for his life. A busload of people navigating survivor remorse in a community in disarray, and heartbreak. It's a Wednesday, November 16th. My name is Jerry Miller. Have a good afternoon.